Howdy y'all, Joe Hills here, recording as I was due in Nashville, Tennessee. And you know what, let's talk a little bit about today, perspective. Or, let's talk a little bit today about perspective. Sometimes when you shuffle things around or juggle them a bit, things get a little shapen or misshapen in ways that you would either expect or not expect, but it can have great effect on the end result. And I wanted to look at that a little bit. One thing you might have noticed is I start a lot of my episodes on the roof of this building. Now, why is that? Well, for one thing, I've got a ladder right up here that just leads me from the ground to the top of this, so then I can fly off and do whatever I want. Now, my house has a pretty good view of this cornfield as well, also has good elevation for jumping off of, but I don't have a way to get up there without using ender pearls, and those, unlike ladders, are consumed. Well, they're consumed when you throw them. If you put ladders into a fire, they will also be consumed. Now, there's a ladder here as well. But you know what? I like this perspective a little bit better. But let me show you something. Dang it. Okay, well, sometimes when you jump off a roof, you fall on your legs. And, oh! My elytra isn't on my back. That would explain why I have been unable to fly. Okay, so we're going to reattach that, and then here we go, soaring off into the distance. Now, I tried starting an episode recently atop this mountain. And one thing I really liked about it is it gives a great view of my farm. But what it actually also does is gives a terrible view of the farm land. The land underneath the crops is actually fairly marshy here. It's worse than the Brady Bunch. Marshes, marshes, marshes. And that stems from the fact that when I originally started on this farm, I was going to have straight rows of crops. And I was going to have straight troughs of water between them. And it just kind of didn't really work out. So now I've got these areas where it's like, well, the ground here is just, well, terrible. Go ahead and put a water bucket here and pick this up like so. But what I'd really like to do is to have a farm that doesn't just look good from one angle, you know? It's great that, like, it looks great if you're on top of it, but, like, I want it to look good if you're down here on the ground. I don't want to fall in every time, you know, I step over a little bit of water. That's why I've got some lily pads and whatnot strewn about now. But you know what? Okay, here we go. Plenty of work to do all around. But you know, how do we make work a little bit more enjoyable? Well, sometimes it's fun to play a game while you work, or sometimes it's helpful to like think about other things while you work, distract you. Because like this is a sort of easy, simple, straightforward work that I can do without really too much concentration as I batter my crops into seeds. Whoops. Okay. So sometimes we also over-confidentialize our ability to do work. Over-confidentialize. That almost sounds like a government word for over-classification of documents, but I don't know. I don't think I can really use that anywhere. So I'll keep that under my hat for later. Let's see. Here we go. Darkened field. Let's get these fireworks out and run to bed real quick. One thing, speaking of games, or the reason I bring games up, is because it is currently Tennessee Game Days weekend in Nashville, and once a year some folks run a 3-day convention where everybody hangs out and plays board games. We got to do some fun stuff already. I went all day Friday. I had to take Saturday off so I could spend time with my daughter and do stuff with the Hermitcraft crowd. We did some pre-recording for an upcoming thing I'm pretty excited about. And so today is Sunday. I'm about to head back to the convention in a little bit. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the fun games I played. Kind of give you, these are not thorough reviews. These are, I'm not going to tell you whether to buy something or not, because honestly, any game that I've played this weekend, I probably only played, well, 1 or 2 rounds of, and with people that I either knew really well or didn't know at all. So you'd have to make your own calls about whether or not something was a good choice for you. But where was I? Out here in the fields, so far from... Oh yeah, games. Anyway, so let's see. What games did I play? I played a few different games, kind of classifying them according to our most recent episodes. One game I played that was particularly good for hanging out and chatting about other things is called Las Vegas, and it's a dice game, about running a casino. Oops. Well, actually, or investing in casinos. It's really not clear that you have to know much about the, dang it, casino management. You're just basically rolling dice and deciding where to put them based on a variety of factors. And it's the basically, because there are 6 different casinos that you can invest in, and you have 8 dice to play with, and the dice are colorful, and there's colorful fake money, it's an amusing diversion. But it's not so diverting that it occupies your entire brain. Now, we played another game, I think it was called Mysterium, and that game is like totally the opposite. You're trying to like solve the mystery, or solve several mysteries, in fact. Every player is a different psychic, and you're trying to communicate with this ghost who's trying to tell you how a different murder... Well, no, I guess it's not a different murder. Well, I don't know. The game was not... We were playing it for the first time, and we didn't know what we were doing. But so this ghost is trying to tell you how to solve these murders. And being a ghost, this is not necessarily the most direct person. And so these clues for the murder are given in the form of these cards that have oil paintings on them. And I didn't really understand it at first, because it's like, okay, first we're trying to figure out the person who committed each of our murders we're investigating. And the ghost would hand us these cards with oil paintings on them that was supposed to correspond to the information we had about the potential murder suspects or whatever. And I was just like, well, this is kind of weird, but okay. And so one player is the ghost. And it turned out that he was actually just eyeballing the information we had and the oil paintings and trying to send us messages, like, based on knowing us, or, like, things that the cards had on them that, like, were similar to the information we had. But there's no rules for that. There's no, like, game... there's no table that comes with the game that just says, hey, if they have this person, play this card, or this person, play this card. If they use this weapon, play this card. So it's just basically like, if you're trying to solve a problem, and a ghost keeps giving you oil paintings to help you solve your problem, that sounds like it might be a little bit frustrating. It kind of was, but it was also so bewildering and different. It really kind of gets the imagination going. So that could be fun with certain people in certain contexts. I happen to enjoy it. We did not make it to the second phase of the game. The game has 2 phases. One with the oil paintings, and then the second phase is a betting phase. But if everybody doesn't solve their oil painting mystery, then you don't even get to do the betting phase. Because you're supposed to also bet on whether or not you think other people's interpretations of the ghost messages are right or wrong. But, like, we were all so bewildered, we couldn't bet worth anything. Which is fun. It's... Whoa. Keyboard stuck. Keyboard. Yes. It is the shoddy carpenter who blames his poor tools. So, let's just pretend that I intentionally ran sideways into that pool there. You know, Joe Hill style. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, Mysterium. It was fun. I don't know what... I didn't really know what I was expecting, and that's about what I got. So, if you're looking for something like that, that might be a fun game for you. If you enjoy being bewildered, then it's great. I think over time, if you played with the same people enough, you might start to establish like a common kind of vocabulary that might work, but that might also kind of ruin the game. So I'm not sure if it has any replay value or whatever, but it looks great. It has all these like cardboard ravens in it. So if you like Edgar Allan Poe and you want to like quote the raven all the time, you can just pick up little cardboard ravens and be like, nevermore, nevermore. Although I think every time you touch them, you're supposed to like get 7 cards or something happens. So don't actually do that unless you know the rules, because you might accidentally lose the game for yourself. Or for the ghost. I'm not even sure if the ghost can win the game. Oh, that's an interesting point. Games I don't know about being talked about by me. The Joe Hill's Out in the Farm story. So, let's see. What else did we play? We played Suro, which is always really fun. It's kind of a knock your friends off the grid game where you play tiles in front of each other. It's very good for hanging out and telling stories, too. We actually had one where we played 34 tiles out of the possible 36, which is very hard to do. But if you don't really know Suro, then that would... I think I've talked about Suro at length in other episodes, though, so I don't want to go too much into that here. Another game we played was actually called Mr. Game, and basically the premise of Mr. Game is it has a very loose set of rules, or a very simple set of loose rules that are very ambiguous in their application. And so at the beginning of a round, you say, okay, or at the beginning of a game of Mr. Game. I don't want to use the word game, but like, I think round is inaccurate because it's what would you call the entire period during which you attempt to compete for something? I think that calling that a game isn't wrong. Did someone plant carrots here? Also, these are, oh, well, I guess they're off because of the water. It's fine. I'll be cool with it. But anyway, in Mr. Game, every time you play, you pick somebody to be Mr. Game. And he or she is in charge of determining the rule ambiguities. Like, what happens if one player lands on another player in the board? It's like a really simple board game with a weird grid with a bunch of blank spaces, a bunch of exclamation point spaces where you draw cards. You can draw tiles to put down. It's like, well, what happens if you put a tile on top of another tile? Well, if it's not defined in the rules, then Mr. Game gets to make a rule. And that rule has to stay in effect for the rest of the game. And all of Mr. Game's rules have to be, like, fair. Like, you can't have a rule that's, like, about people. Like, people with blonde hair have to go back 2 spaces if that happens. It has to be, like, people that land on top of each other send the other one back 2 spaces. And then, things like that. So the rules have to be consistent with each other. They have to be consistent across players, as long as but they can be situationally dependent. And the rules aren't necessarily defined until the situation arises. So you don't just sit there at the beginning of the game saying like, "Oh, I'm Mr. Game, so here's how we're gonna play." Like the first time something happens, then you kind of see what happens, and that kind of gives Mr. Game a lot of freedom to basically. His goal is to optimize for everyone having the most fun. Like, try to come up with the most bizarre rules. Because if Mr. Game just tries to write rules that will result in their own character or token winning, then basically there is a ability for the entire table to just say, no, you're not Mr. Game anymore. Somebody else is going to have a turn. Like, we will depose you in the middle of this game of Mr. Game. Mr. Game, I'm sorry. But we're not really sorry. We've never actually had to depose anybody because we tend to have good actors, not like theatrically trained people, but like people who genuinely want to play a game to be more fun and helpful and stuff like that. Oh, speaking of games about being fun and helpful, I got to play the demo of this game called The Big Score. And this is like super early. They didn't have the real artwork or anything. It was like, but it's a local games company. And so The Big Score is this game they're working on. It's a heist game. And you're supposed to, like, go and do all these jobs and stuff to prepare for this big heist you're gonna pull off. And the thing about the game is in the final round, when you're all in the vault, it's kind of got this, like, brinksmanship thing where you're trying to decide how long you should stay in the vault. And you're trying to get other people to get caught by the cops so you can get a bigger share of the loot and stuff. But you can just leave before, like, there's kind of this marker where as things get kind of more and more high stakes, the cops are more and more likely to come. But if you cash out, if you just leave, like, you can leave with the money you have. You don't necessarily get a ton of money, but you still get some. And so it's just like, well, okay, so if I've got $300,000... and I think the cops are likely to come on the next turn, or the next 2 turns, then I might just leave. And so, man, those pumpkins grow fast. So I'm just like, okay, well, I think that, and if the cops show up, they're going to bust those guys, and then they won't have any money, and I might win. And, like, mathematically, I was just like, well, I think I'm safe if I stick around for 2 more turns, maybe. But I can't be sure. And I've already got, like, $300 or $300,000 in in-game money in my pockets. Like, how bad is it to walk away from a bank heist with $300,000? That seems pretty good. And so I left the vault, and the guy who designed the game afterwards was just like, why did you leave so early? That other guy got $1.2 million and he was in first and you were in last. And I was like, oh, well, if the cop showed up, he wouldn't have gotten anything. But, like, it also just kind of made sense to me. Like, if I had gotten in there and I didn't have anything to show for it yet, then sure, I'll stick around. I didn't do all this work to get into this bank vault to, like, just walk away empty-handed. But, like, at the same time, $300,000 is a lot of money for, an hour's work. Like, I know we did these other jobs together first, but, like, no sense in risking my life or, because, like, here's the thing. If you get caught in the bank vault by the police, yeah, you might get arrested, but you might also get shot. You could die. Like, I'm not going to risk my life when I could walk away with $300,000. That's a decent amount of money for one take. Which, I didn't get the highest score. But, like, how am I supposed to feel like $300,000 isn't a lot of money? Like, I don't... Because it's not like we buy things throughout the game where I'm like, oh, I could have bought this if I had $300,000. The game has no context for, like, acquiring things. Like, in Dungeons & Dragons... Like, if I was like, oh, man, if I could get X number of gold, then we could buy an airship. And I might want to take a risk for that, But with this, it was just kind of like, well, I'm robbing a bank and walking out with $300,000 seems pretty good. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to wrap my head around. I'm actually probably going to head over to the convention shortly. So why don't we go ahead and break off here, and then I can come back and talk about some other games I played. Or if something crazy happens along the way, then I'll tell you a story about why I didn't get to go to the convention today. Or if this video never sees the light of day, I guess goodbye, everyone. Well, anyway, let's see you on the other side. I'll send you some oil paintings. Well, I am back from TGD Day 3. Well, technically it was my second day. It was Sunday. But you know what? I had a really good time. Got to play a few more games. One of them is called 10 Days in the USA, in which you plot a fictional trip. I guess you could actually go on the trip later if you wanted. Across the United States by, like, drawing tiles, and you have to choose states that are adjacent to each other or match certain patterns on a map. And, the map is pretty interesting, because you could theoretically use any map to play the game, except that you need certain colorful cues added to each state. So you'd have to, like, you could buy a map, and then make your own cards, and then draw on the map, which I guess if you're really dedicated enough, you could probably reproduce any game in this manner, if you were so inclined. Now, I'm looking at this here, and this watery patch is definitely going to need some work. Now, another few things that I did TGD on Sunday was I got a picture, or a few pictures, of the custom Stratego game that was made by Craig Herbert. Now, Craig Herbert does all sorts of, like, crazy, handcrafted, custom board game pieces and custom boards, and the Stratego set is kind of an interesting... Whoops, that's not how that goes. An interesting exception to his normal process, because, like, he can make all these crazy miniatures and stuff like that for all sorts of games. But for the Stratego game, he just printed out some stickers and put them on there. But the idea was that he put stickers for different political parties, like Democrats and Republicans, and had the various ranks of Stratego pieces correspond with various elements of or within these political parties. So instead of having a flag that you're trying to defend, you have the White House that you're trying to defend, and instead of surrounding your flag with bombs that will surprise the enemy players as they attack, he had news networks that, upon contact with the skin, will obviously cause combustion as well. Just a lot of little jokes like that, little clever stuff, and I particularly enjoyed it. I'm going to go ahead and... I've got the pictures on the Twitter, but let me throw them up into the sky real quick. Wow, it's like I'm looking at clouds, but they're actually Stratego pieces. It's one of those weird things about how life works. But anyway, you guys can pause the video there if you wanted to, like, look at those in more detail, or they're on my Twitter, which you can find at twitter.com/JoeHills. But let's see. So other things I did was we played with these story cubes a little bit, my friends and I had mentioned that I felt like if you had more of a framework for the story cubes, you might be able to tell more interesting stories or whatever with more realistic plots. And so one of the things that we did, since we all are familiar with some of the same TV shows, we said, okay, well, how would you write we're going to write a TV show premise or an episode together of this show or that show using these particular dice. And the shared characters and general structure of the shows kind of allowed us to be more creative by leveraging the framework. Which you'd think, oh, okay, framework, how's that going to help you be more creative? Well, actually, you wouldn't unless you're a child. In which case, thank you for watching this with your parents. I hope you guys are kind and gentle to each other. Or at least that you learn from them when they tell you not to, like, burn your hand on stuff. So, where was I? Hitting things with other things. That's the best part of farming, if you ask me. This is actually coming along pretty well over here. As you can tell from up on that cliff, we've gotten most of these big strips of water knocked out here. Occasional... Do I hear a zombie? Huh. Well, there must be something like underground or something. But, anyway. Yeah, so we got some areas here that still need a little bit of light. Still need a little bit of dirt. But, on the whole, coming together. Did I play any other games on Sunday? We were kind of in a rush. We ended up spending a lot more time just hanging out and talking. And the story cubes, if you're playing them, since we had 21 story cubes and we were trying to tell like a 23-minute episode of a TV show, we ended up spending a lot more time on those than I might have in my YouTube series here. But that actually reminds me. So yeah, in the same way that the story cubes kind of gave us a framework for telling stories together like that, they might work well for one of my next, like, Hermitcraft fan fiction workshops or something. We did play one other game called Ink and Gold that I liked, and it's about exploring this Incan temple and trying to be the person to push the furthest into the temple and find the most treasure without, like, dying. It's kind of like blackjack, where you try and push further and further. And unlike blackjack, though, there's not like a clear, like, okay, you hit 21, so, you know, that's the best possible thing. The upshot just is always increasing, but the odds of accidentally running into, like, something deadly also increases. And that's an interesting... The way they do it, it's kind of a card-drawing game, where you either draw, like, a card that is a hazard or a card that is a treasure. And the hazard cards, the first time you draw one, like, there's no penalty, because, like, oh, let's say that you run into a room full of snakes. The game assumes that you're a remarkably competent explorer who, you know, brought anti-venom or whatever. And then you run into a room where boulders fall on you, and that's okay, too, because you have, you know, your ropes with you and are able to extricate yourself from whatever might have befallen you or onfallen you. But anyway, so you can just keep drawing these hazard cards and treasure cards, and as long as you don't run into the same hazard twice, you can continue exploring. And I kind of like that. I like the idea that, like, well, you wouldn't be here if you weren't ready to deal with spiders. But what if there are twice as many spiders as you expected? Well, you're going to have a bad day. And there's just something I like about that. I feel like the game respects the players, but the player also has to respect the game. Otherwise, he'll keep pushing too far and won't actually... If you lose, like if you hit two of the same identical hazards on the same expedition into the temple without, like, going out to the encampment area and putting stuff in your tent, then you will have to surrender any treasure you found that round. So you don't want to push too far, but if you don't push, you won't have any treasure to bring back at all. And one thing I really like about this game is the fact that the tent cards, it comes with, like, the tents are like just cards that you fold up or that you can curl up. And there's an entire, like, manual that comes with the game, or like an entire single sheet of paper, like full color, with different ways that you can fold the tent cards to hide your treasure in. And since the copy of the game that we played was owned by somebody else, they were pre-folded. But, like, they spent way more effort on the graphic design for this fake instruction manual for how to use your tents than they really needed to, which was also kind of made me happy. A little bit of extra joy here and there in people's lives is never a bad thing. So let's go ahead. I don't think I need this one. Although, I guess that's to help me find this if I lose it. Okay, well, all the dead are coming out, and I don't have any food. Oh, I do have food, but I'm not using it well. Any of them see me yet? Okay. So, now would be a good time to run off to bed. But you know what? Let's just quickly go up here one more time and give the farm a top-down view. So this part of the farm, there's a lot of work to do. But in the process of our gaming discussion, we actually cleaned up a good amount of this. Well, there's still some there that needs to be touched up, but like, on the whole, we're doing pretty fine. So, I might as well call it an episode here. Hope to see some of you guys at International Game Day in Nashville on April 29th. I'm going to have some more details about that soon, but I'm definitely going to be showing up and hopefully doing something fun with some of y'all if you are able to make it. Well, anyway, until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. Keep adventuring.